you can send that out. That is there's, you got the notification for the recording. We are
Yes.
same for this meeting. The access for that video, just so everyone's aware, is not public, so it won't be searchable or anything like that.
Okay, this particular meeting today.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I might have to jump off for a quick emergency, but I'll be back on.
All right, Christopher, I think we can.
Yeah, I think we can get started. Thank you all for being here today. As Dan just mentioned, we are recording the meeting, but the meeting will only be available via a private link to NLWG members. It will not be a public facing link, and it's only available for 60 days from the date of the meeting. So if you are interested or want to, catch up or review, just please reach out to one of us, Dan or I, and we'll definitely be able to share that link with you. A couple other housekeeping items before we get started. Please stay on mute if you're not participating. You can raise your hand or use the group chat in Zoom, as I'm sure most of you are aware by now. And yeah, if you're comfortable using video, that's great. We love seeing all your faces, so we appreciate your time today. Another item, we'd like to start the meeting with an acknowledgement that today is a federal holiday. So we didn't quite realize when we were scheduling that today was both Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. So thanks for taking time. If you do have the day off, thank you for being here. But yes, we wanted to start the day with a recognition that many states, local governments, and other jurisdictions do observe both Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day. And given NLWG's work with tribes, tribal groups, and how these issues impact tribal lands, that we thought it was important to read a tribal land acknowledgement to start today's meeting. So tribal land acknowledgements are a way to formally acknowledge Indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of the land where the particular entity is holding a meeting. Tribal land and nation acknowledgements are ways to correct stories and practices that have long distorted our nation's history and culture and provide a simple yet powerful way to show respect. You may ask yourself why it's important for us to include acknowledgement as part of our meeting today. So I'll refer to a passage written by scholar Natanya Ann Pulley. She writes, "An acknowledgement is more than identifying or recognizing someone or something. Acknowledging is also an act of honoring, blessing, celebrating, and thanking. There is a responsibility inherent in acknowledging one another. To acknowledge is to recognize one's own positionality and to accept what that means for today and tomorrow, as well as the past. Land acknowledgements are moments of acceptance, an acceptance that just doesn't happen in the mind or heart, but is informed by and demonstrated by all that we are and all that we do. We accept that the land has long held Indigenous languages, ideas, bodies, creations, and movements, and we don't just listen for echoes of that past, but we reflect on what it means for the land to still hold those languages and peoples today. When we acknowledge the land and First Peoples, we also honor time in that cruel and beautiful way that the past is never truly in the past, but carries forward to today, to right now. Through thoughtful and purposeful acknowledgements, we begin to unravel the narrative of settler colonialism and dismantle the structures that have kept that narrative at the forefront of not only the land's history, but our day-to-day engagement with the world around and within us. So since our office is located in Denver, we thought an acknowledgement of the tribal nations that reside and have cultural and historical connections to the Denver area would be appropriate. According to the American Library Association, Denver is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary grounds of the Arapaho tribe as laid out in the 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie. Additional tribes such as the Apache, Comanche, Shoshone, and Ute also have culturally significant ties to the Denver area. But once gold was discovered, it led to the termination of land, and communities such as the Arapaho and Cheyenne were relocated out of the state of Colorado. Then during the relocation era of the 1950s and 1960s, Denver was one of 9 federal relocation sites, which was a part of an effort to promote assimilation by moving Native Americans from reservations to urban centers across the US. And as a result, approximately 7,000 people have identified as American Indian, Alaskan Native that reside in Denver today. So all that is to say, although Indigenous communities may not physically reside in the area, it is important to recognize that Indigenous people still have a connection to their ancestral lands, and we should share and acknowledge this out of respect to Indigenous communities throughout the nation. And if you're interested in doing sort of your own land acknowledgement or simply learning more about Indigenous peoples that have connections to your home, city, or region, we'll be sharing an interactive website / map in the chat. This is a link to a map that shows the different sort of historical tribal regions overlaid on a modern map of the United States. So you can type in actually your home address or a city or region and see what tribes historically occupied that area. And so since we're having a virtual meeting and we're spread all throughout the United States, we thought it would be a good way for members to kind of do an individual land acknowledgement or just learn more about tribal lands in the US, right? But yes, thank you for that time. And we'll sort of get into the meat of the NLWG meeting today. So just a couple of quick updates about the DOE intergovernmental meeting, as well as NLWG future meetings. So I know you've seen a lot of sort of correspondence from us lately regarding the DOE intergovernmental meeting that was scheduled in Nashville next month. Just a reminder that in-person meeting has been canceled or postponed. And the DOE intergovernmental group is planning to replace the in-person meeting this November with a combination of 1 or 2 virtual sessions this fall, and then an in-person meeting in spring of 2022. So the first of those kind of intergovernmental webinar sessions is for the Office of Environmental Management Strategic Vision. The office is seeking group feedback on the strategic vision that was published sometime earlier this year. It's the Strategic Vision 2021 to 2031. I think Dan's putting that link in the chat, and it's also on the meeting agenda, and we'll circulate it at the end of the meeting today as well. So if you want to review the vision and participate in sort of that, they're describing it as like a fireside chat with the Office of Environmental Management. We don't have firm details yet, but it's looking like that a meeting date will be set for October 21st. So just in a few days. And then looking forward, there might be 1 or 2 intergovernmental meeting sessions, virtual, of course, during the week of the previously planned in-person meeting. Details are forthcoming on that. And then they're essentially moving the intergovernmental meeting to spring of 2022 and going to be hosting 2 intergovernmental meetings in 2022. So you get double the fun in 2022. There'll be 1 sort of meeting in the spring and then a normal timing one in the fall to try to kind of get us back on track to a normal meeting schedule. So I know that was a lot of information to take in, so I'd like to open the floor to any questions about the DOE intergovernmental meeting or comments.
Do you have locations for those 2 meetings, Chris?
So the in-person ones we don't have locations yet. One of them will probably be Nashville. I think we're going to try to just kind of move our planned sort of, locations for what was this fall to next year, but I'm not sure if that's going to be in the spring or the fall meeting.
Okay, good. Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions before moving on to sort of the individual NLWG meetings we have planned?
Yeah, just to clarify, Christopher, I think I might have missed it, but there are 2 competing options being weighed by the planning committee. The 2 intergov meetings, 1 in the spring and the fall, and then to do individual group meetings and then an intergov meeting. So 1 of each we have traditionally done. So in that case, we're still in the process of sort of figuring that out with the group. All of this is very much moving quickly, week by week, as you have noticed. But So those are the things we're weighing at the moment.
Yeah, and just kind of going off of that, we do realize that 2 intergovernmental meetings in the fall in 2022 is kind of a lot. And we posed that question to you in the survey and kind of in the last meeting, and the overwhelming response, I think, from every participant has been, we'd rather do 1 individual NLWG meeting in the spring, as we've typically done, and then attend a DOE intergovernmental in the fall. So if the plans are sort of coming together as we see, as we sort of kind of see the writing on the wall, I think that's sort of what the plan we will pursue as a group. Dan just posted in the chat a link to that survey if you would like to participate. There's also a question regarding what individual NLWG meeting topics and sessions you would look forward to, or speakers that you have in mind. So feel free to note that in the survey, or message us in the chat, or reach out individually. Mindy, I see you have a question.
I was just going to add in, for those who don't know me, I'm Mindy Bridges. I also work at NCSL with Dan and Christopher and Gretchen and Aaron, who are also on the meeting. But I staff our the state and tribal government working group. So your state agencies and Native American tribes are also impacted by the cleanup of the nuclear weapons complex. So I'm also involved with the planning for the meeting, and there's 6 groups, including NLWG, that participates in the intergovernmental group meeting. So lots of NCSL staff involved, and just want to introduce myself and kind of mention one of the other groups that's involved with intergovernmental meetings, since there's probably several that haven't attended before.
Great. Thanks, Mindy. Yeah, and are there any other comments or questions about sort of future individual NLWG meetings? All right, so if you do think of something, feel free to reach out. Obviously, you can give us shoot us an email or give us a call, and we'll of course keep you updated as soon as we learn about things. So thank you for your patience and flexibility regarding these meetings. So with those sort of administrative items being taken care of, I would like to turn the floor over to Senator Maddie Hunter from Illinois. She's the co-chair of the NLWG meeting, NLWG group, and she's offered to provide an update regarding the recent Illinois Climate and Equitable Jobs Act and its implications on energy as well as nuclear in her state. So I'll turn the floor over to you, Senator Hunter.
Thank you very much, Chris and Dan, for having me here today. I apologize for the snafu we had at last meeting. It was just a miscommunication on the time, but I'm here now. And Chris, thank you so much for the update for activities for next year, meetings for next year, as well as that wonderful historical perspective on Indigenous people. That was really wonderful. So thanks very much. So good afternoon, everyone. As you know, I'm State Senator Maddie Hunter from Illinois, the 3rd Legislative District. And as the co-chair of NCSL's Nuclear Legislative Work Group, I'm happy to be here with you for today's webinar. And I'd like to just simply welcome you, especially spending your time with us today on a holiday. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of today's topic, I am going to talk a little bit about clean energy and how Illinois is working to combat climate change. This bill has the support of environmental, consumer, and public health groups, the clean energy industry, and organized crime. And it was passed with a bipartisan vote. As you all know, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report on the state global warming was particularly alarming. And it made clear that we need to do more in order to save our planet from the worst of climate change. To take much needed climate action on the state level, my colleagues in our state legislature have been working on a comprehensive climate package for at least 18 years. It could have gone into 2 years. I don't know, it's such a difficult task. And it took lots of negotiation and compromise to get it passed. This bill, known as Senate Bill 2408, was signed into law on September 15, 2021. This legislation addresses a wide range of issues relating to energy, including workforce and contractor development, ethics, electric vehicles, energy efficiency, decarbonization, and more, all of which aim to improve Illinois' trajectory on clean energy. Keeping jobs was one of the biggest negotiating points for this legislation. We saved thousands of good-paying jobs at carbon-free nuclear power plants and created thousands more in the green energy industry. Keeping nuclear plants open will save 28,000 direct and indirect jobs. Increasing Illinois renewable portfolio standards target to 50% will create more than 50,000 new jobs. In addition, we're creating a number of statewide programs to help train workers for the new clean energy economy and provide a pipeline for good paying jobs. We are creating a new clean energy economy by taking steps to ensure everyone has fair access to those job investments and opportunities. A special grant program will address the economic and social impacts of coal, natural gas, and nuclear plant closures to help residents find good paying jobs and allow communities to maintain high quality public services. A displaced energy worker Bill of Rights will require power plants and mines to provide workers with advance notice of closures and information about programs available to assist them in the energy transition, including career services, financial planning, and insurance alternatives. Children of displaced workers will receive scholarships for 1 year of tuition at state colleges and universities. We also created new ethics rules dictating how utility companies can hire lobbyists, contractors, and vendors to ensure that they don't violate the public trust and the law. Furthermore, we're holding ComEd responsible for its ethical failures by setting in place new safeguards to help ensure no utility company ever again tries to break the law for financial gain. To encourage the use of electric vehicles, Senate Bill 2408 establishes a state goal of 1 million new electric vehicles by 2030. The Illinois Department of Transportation will conduct a study on how EV proliferation may adversely impact transportation infrastructure. We are incentivizing building electric vehicle charging stations in low-income communities to encourage more people to use electric vehicles as they become more affordable and prevalent. We've established a goal of 100% clean energy by 2050, doing our part to fight global warming. To get there even faster, we've more than doubled the state's budget for renewable energy and set a goal of 50% renewable energy by 2040. We significantly expanded energy efficiency incentives, especially those for low-income weatherization improvements. Improved energy efficiency saves consumers money and helps protect the environment by drawing down demand for electricity and gas. We also established a public school carbon-free assessment program to improve investments in energy efficiency and renewable energy technology at all the public schools throughout the state of Illinois. We've created a program to allow customers to finance energy efficiency upgrades through their utility bills. We're requiring all privately owned large coal to close by 2030. All privately owned natural gas plants must either repower to a carbon-free source like green hydrogen or close by 2045. We're requiring municipally owned coal to reduce emissions by 45% by 2035. In addition, we're allowing 2 new renewable energy transmission lines to be built to help bring affordable, clean energy to Illinois and other states, making our power grid more reliable. Ultimately, I am glad to be able to pass such a trailblazing piece of legislation. With the implementation of this package, Illinois is becoming a leader on clean energy, and the rest of the country can learn from us. I am confident that we have made strides that will impact people from different walks of life, especially for Black and Brown workers who will have increased access to employment opportunities in the energy sector. I hope you all can be inspired by these measures and inspire change in your own communities. We all share this planet together, and we each has a role of protecting it, not just for us, but for those who come after us. So I'd like to thank you for having me, and enjoy the rest of the webinar, or I'll take some questions. Thank you very much. As you can see, well, I'll just stop there and see what kind of questions.
Yeah, we can open it up for questions. I want to thank you, Senator Hunter, for the monumental task of consolidating a 900+ page bill, 5-minute presentation. So
Yes, it wasn't easy, I'll tell you that. So
I know. Well, we appreciate that. I do want to have a chance for anyone to ask questions of Senator Hunter regarding the legislation. If so, you can raise your hand or just unmute and start talking. Hey, Delegate Brooks.
Okay, thanks, Senator, for getting that bill passed.
thank you.
We were trying to do something like that in Maryland. Matter of fact, we were trying to transition from coal-fired generation. We had 6 coal-fired plants in Maryland, and we had retired 2 of them. And we were trying to retire, at least set a date certain that the remaining 4 were going to be decommissioned. But we got some tremendous pushback from labor.
Yeah.
Now, what this bill was going to do, we were going to set aside like $39 million to help that transition, give an off ramp to
Sure.
those impacted workers, and also for those particular counties that were going to be losing tax revenues because of the retirement of those plants. But here again, the majority of the pushback came from labor. And as we know, coal is the dirtiest fuel that one can use in generating
Sure.
electricity. And coal is definitely on its way out.
Mhm.
And but it so happened that after the pushback, the bill, of course, we weren't able to get it across the line, but one of the plants that was going to eventually decommission that particular plant, they went ahead and did so early. At least in this bill, these folks would have had $39 million set aside to help doing that transition. So I'd like to find out, what did you guys do to make sure that you got across the line with your bill? You know.
Yes, thank you for that question.
Pushback from labor.
Yeah, I understand exactly, Delegate Brooks, what you guys have been going through, because you heard me say it took 18 months, probably 24 months to get this thing done. This is why we had to bring everybody that was involved to the table. I did not mention that we brought in mayors and Chamber of Commerce's and every school districts, you know, trying to satisfy everyone. Labor and the environmentalists, they were the most challenging pieces that we had to satisfy, because everyone is concerned about their membership.
Right.
The environmentalists, they wanted everything. I mean, they literally wanted everything, and I can understand that. But when they realized that the ratepayers were going to have to pay for it, they pulled back, and they said, "Oh no, we will not be blamed for an increase in folks' bills." You know, and so we just had to stop the negotiations. And you had to start having private meetings with different groups, to find out what are your issues? What do you want out of this? What are you willing to give up? Everyone has to sacrifice in order for us to pull this thing together, So we had to hold hands and have counseling sessions and all kinds of things. And then lots of it was personality conflicts, and so we had to find out which entity or which group had issues with certain staff that were at the table or what. So we had to separate people like children. We have to separate folks in order to get it done. You have to have one-on-one meetings and private meetings. And so you guys are going to have to just roll up your sleeves and get it done. Now, I would be more than happy to get you all together with the leaders of this bill, because what we did was we did not have only the sponsor of the legislation to negotiate the bill. What we did was pull together about six of our colleagues together. Some were union supported, some were proponents of unions, some environmentalists. So all of the different groups that worked on this piece, we made sure that their legislative colleague or friend was at the table,
Right.
And so therefore we used them to get this thing done.
Okay, well, I intend to reintroduce, but yeah, I will try to reach out to all the stakeholders this time and make sure
Yeah,
that.
and we even had to get
everybody on board.
the governor, we had reached a point where we couldn't go any further, And so we had to send the governor in, and he had to meet with certain folks in certain groups, So we just threw the whole kitchen sink at everybody
Okay.
in order to get this thing done, because we were determined to get it done. We came into special session twice because we thought we had a deal on the table. And we finally got it passed in the Senate and sent it over to the House. And then the House said, absolutely not. And we have a new Speaker of the House over there, and a number of things he wasn't privy to. So we had to go home with nothing done. Everyone had, we had mud on our faces. It was so embarrassing, So then we went back down, and the House said, okay, well, we are going to pass this. He says, House, since you all have more issues than you all pass it. So they passed it, and they made all kinds of changes, all kinds of amendments. And some of it we did not agree with. But the fact of the matter is that if we wanted this thing done, we'll get it done. And we decided that if we need to go ahead and change it or run a trailer bill during veto session that's coming up next week or sometime next year, we'll do it just to get this thing done. And so we that's what happened.
Okay.
We
Thank you.
appreciate that. It is some really great perspective on the legislative process and just how much goes into it.
Yeah.
I want to give time, for David Brock Smith, representative of Oregon. He had one quick question, and then we're going to have to transition to Rod's presentation just in the interest of time to be able to make sure
Okay.
all
Thank you.
that time. So Representative Smith.
Thank you, Dan. And Senator, I really appreciate your perspective in the fact that the sausage is still made the same in your neck of the woods as it is in Oregon.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I just actually would like you, if I put my email in the chat, if you can send
Okay.
me the link to the legislation so I can dive deeper into it. I'm everything in energy and environment in Oregon.
Okay.
And I'm a big nuclear fan. We actually have a NuScale Nuclear out of Oregon State University. That's small modular, small community, excuse me, nuclear. But more importantly, Oregon has had this big push with regards to, they just passed 100% clean bill, for example. So we'll have 100% clean energy by 2045.
Yes.
But of course, we know the technology doesn't exist to get the last 15%. So I'm always interested in not having to reinvent the wheel. Appreciate your hard work and look forward to gleaning whatever I can from your work so that I can help
Sure.
Oregonians.
Yes, thank you so much. I will do that. I'll get your email from the chat. Thank you very much for those comments, Rep.
Yes, thank you. And we will I'll get the link to the bill and put that in the chat as well. I do want to now.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Senator Hunter. Illinois now is going to continue to be the largest producer of nuclear power in the country. They've been number one for quite a while, and they're going to continue in that position moving forward. So
Right on.
turn it over to Christine Chismadia now. She is the Director for State Government Affairs and Advocacy at the Nuclear Energy Institute. She has been a longtime supporter of this group, just a great friend to a lot of us. So I wanted to give her a chance to address all of you, and she'll turn it over to Rod.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. And hi, folks. I've been seeing a lot of returning faces, but also new faces, which is really exciting for me because that means I'm going to get to know new legislators and talk more about nuclear with all of you. So thanks to Dan and Christopher for this meeting. I'm excited for us to get back in person. And a big salute to Senator Hunter. The hall that was lifted in Illinois is huge. Obviously, you just went through 1,000 pages in summary, but that bill was the single most important policy that was passed this year for the nuclear industry. And not only was a clean energy bill and did so much more for other clean energy technologies, but it saved important assets, multiple nuclear power plants, thousands of jobs, millions of dollars in economic asset to the state. It was just incredibly important. And so that was a very deliberate effort on the part of Illinois, and that is something that obviously we support as an industry. And it really is on trend with what we're seeing nationally, this trend of clean energy policies that are passing across the states. And that comes in a lot of forms, and a lot of you already have them in place. In Oregon, you just passed your clean energy standard. Washington State had a really great clean energy standard, New Mexico, Virginia. And then just last week, North Carolina passed a version of their decarbonization plan. So just some really interesting, smart policies that are getting passed and we're seeing across the country. So, and we're very encouraged that nuclear folds nicely and is treated evenly with other carbon-free technologies in a lot of these policies. So thank you for all the good work that you all do. The other big trend that we're seeing really is around small modular reactors and new nuclear. And I'm gonna put a pin in that and we'll talk about that on another webinar. Because I don't want to take up any more time from my colleague, Rod McCullum. I'm very excited that he has some time that he can share with you guys today. Rod has spent 35 years working on nuclear engineering, licensing, management, and regulatory policies, so he is an expert. Please do ask him questions. He is currently the lead of the industry's efforts to reduce business risks associated with used nuclear fuel management and commercial nuclear plant decommissioning. So he understands the issue broadly. He has previous positions with DOE and has worked at several nuclear power plants himself. He's got a bachelor's in nuclear engineering and an MBA. So he understands the business side and the technology side of things. So without further ado, my colleague, Rod McCullum. Thanks, Rod.
Thank you, Christine. And I see Dan has my slides up. I want to begin by congratulating again Senator Hunter. I know I was at Zion the day it shut down, and so I know how significant these things are. I also want to thank Dan for that very appropriate and inspiring ode to the lands of indigenous peoples. And when you think about what Senator Hunter and your colleagues in Illinois just went through, and what Dan was mentioning is really at the intersection of these kinds of things. You know, if we're going to, what we do with used fuel will in large part be dictated by how we respect indigenous rights and how we adhere to broader environmental justice principles wherever we're going to go with used fuel. And of course, the interest in decarbonization that kept the Illinois State Legislature up That causes people to look at nuclear as it should. It causes them to want to know more about used fuel. So I'm sure glad we've got this crowd. I'm always honored to address such a large group of legislators. I know you guys don't get rich doing this. You're public servants, and we're glad you're doing it. I may have spoken with some of you in the before times. I think I attended a meeting of this committee back in New Orleans. So I think I somewhat see some familiar faces, but on Zoom, it's so hard. I do have a lot of used fuel 101 in this presentation. And so if something just happened there. Okay, let's get right to that. Suddenly my view changed and now I can't see you. Excuse me a second. There we go. To the extent I can see you, that's why Dan's driving the slides. So again, I'll skip through the basics. These are materials you'll have if you want to use them with constituents or people who are concerned. As you know, used fuel is the most radioactive of materials. The vast quantity, the vast majority of all radioactivity in a nuclear plant is in the used fuel. Not talking about lower levels of waste form, all of those have disposal solutions already in the United States. It's used fuel that tends to be the flashpoint of controversy, and it really, it doesn't need to be. Dan can go to the next slide. So, you know, what is used fuel? Well, it's pretty much the same thing as new fuel, except it's had some nuclear reactions occur inside it. Every time you split an atom of uranium to make energy, and we get a tremendous amount of energy out of these atoms, you produce radioactive byproducts. They stay within the fuel. One of the things of the mythology of used fuel is that, you know, people will talk about how dangerous it is. It is one of the most radioactive things on the planet, but it is also inherently containable. The risk something presents is both the level of the hazard and start my video. Okay, so there may be technical difficulties. Can you hear me? Okay, I see some nods. I see the thumb. Great. Trying to communicate here. So, you know, you look at the record we've had of containing. We've been pulling these fuel assemblies out of the plants for several decades now, back to the beginning of the industry. We store every assembly we've produced safely. There's never been a release. There's no reason to believe there will be one. People talk about used fuel in terms of its radioactivity, but they've also got to talk in terms of its containability. And I'll have some things for you here. If you go to the next slide, Dan. There's really only 5 things we can do with used fuel. We can store it inside the plant, which you see in the spent fuel pools. We can store it outside the plant. Dry cask storage is quite an industrial success story. I'll show you some numbers on our how many of these systems we've deployed. We can store it away from the plant. I think the main focus of your interest today is consolidated interim storage. And by the way, I would welcome discussion. If you want to raise a hand during my talk, I won't be offended. If I'm wallowing in basics here when you want to get to the nitty and the gritty. We can store away from the plant and back again. There is again some interest in recycling. You can never make all the fission products magically disappear, but you can extract a lot more energy out of the same fuel. That's good resource utilization, producing less used fuel to produce even more energy. And of course, the ultimate goal away from civilization. Geologic disposal is the widely accepted solution internationally, scientifically, and it's really very simple. It's a race between radiation decay processes and geologic processes. Physics tells us exactly how long it takes these radioactive materials to decay to the point where they're not radioactive anymore. We also have a very rich record of examining the geology. We know the eons over which rock forms have evolved and mountains have risen and all that. And what you want to do is you want to bet on the geologic processes to be slower than the radiation decay processes. And we have pretty good confidence they are. This has been studied in a number of countries. I'll get to that in a minute. But the question is always where, and that's where these issues of how important is decarbonization and how important is environmental justice still have to come together. If we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is an example of what I would call over designing the protection, but I think everybody, given the radioactive nature of this, wants the protection to be over designed. So we're certainly okay with that. Unfortunately, the taxpayers pay for it, which is why we do need to get to a more efficient and final solutions. But there's a lot of containment in the fuel itself. And if the fuel is known to be damaged before it goes into storage, we put yet another can around it. We put another layer of protection. You have the, it's an inert atmosphere. You got the engineered basket you can see to hold it precisely in place. No moving parts, and then of course you have the steel shell inside the concrete outer shell. One of the things the critics of used fuel, those who want you to believe it's dangerous, will tell you is that we put it in these thin-walled casks, and they'll say 1/2 inch, 5/8 of an inch. It's easy to portray that as thin until you start to think about the metallurgy of stainless steel. These stainless steel canisters are going to last a long, long time, and we've actually got a lot of science on this. I guess the best way I could illustrate it, if the skin on the DeLorean, which is a stainless steel car, was as thick as this kind of stainless steel, it would have been way too heavy to drive, much less travel back to the future with Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd. So these are not thin walled casks. This is a major hunk of stainless steel, and a lot of industrial infrastructure has been devoted to producing these things. If you haven't toured some of the factories where these are made, you might want to do that someday. It's very impressive. Another thing that's very impressive, Dan, if you can go on to the next slide, is just Google Holtec missile cask. I'm not going to try to show a movie in the middle of a presentation over Zoom because I know that'll just blow up the internet, but and then you'll never see me again. But we put a missile into one of these without the outer concrete shell. This was actually there's the outer concrete shell, and there's also another containment you put over it when it's transport, because you can store them and you can transport them. And this was more transportation focused, but 600 miles an hour, only the stainless steel shell and the leak tightness of the system was maintained. So a very graphic illustration of what that is. You go to the next slide. I think it's always very important to point out before I show the map of where all this stuff is stored, to again talk about how much it is. I think if you were to live a long life, past the normal human life expectancy a little bit, and get all of your electricity needs, all of your energy needs from nuclear energy, you would only produce an amount of used fuel this would fit in this can of Diet Pepsi here. But so it's another way of saying it is this football field analogy here. All the fuel we've produced in 60 years of generating carbon-free nuclear energy, it could be, if you stack them all on top of each other, which we're not recommending, would fit on a single football field about 10 yards high. That's a tremendous amount of energy for a very small environmental footprint. Of course, you go to the next slide, Dan. The problem is it's very inefficient that we have all this material in so many different places. Your interest in consolidated interim storage is indeed key here, because it would benefit the system greatly if we could take that small amount of material and put it in 1 or 2 places, and then of course put it in the geology where no future civilization has to worry about it. This is particularly becoming a topic of interest in communities around shutdown plants, where we've gotten very good in the United States at decommissioning a nuclear plant, taking it down to a green field, except off to the side of that green field, there's still going to be one of these dry cask storage facilities until we have somewhere to send it. So land can't be repurposed. I know, again, back to Zion, that site has been decommissioned. They're waiting final clearance of the land, but the dry casks remain there as an example. So if we can, but before I leave this slide is to point out is, we've deployed over 3,000 of these systems. We've engineered them to be safe for the long term. It is not our intention that they sit where they are for the long term, or that we keep them on the surface for the long term, because remember, we're all about overkill here. We want to put that final layer of geologic protection on top of all of this. Not our generation, the next generation. My kids have grown to adulthood while I was working on this issue in NEI, so I've already missed one generation of opportunity to solve these things, and we don't want to keep passing it on to future generations, but we're confident that the generations that live today can continue to effectively manage it. It's kind of a conundrum. It's so well managed, why worry about it? Well, you have to have that long view. And that gets back to what Dan said about the indigenous people. Indigenous peoples have philosophies that tend to be rooted in thinking 7 generations ahead. So you have to think like a Native American to really understand this issue. And again, it's about having the geologic processes win the race to slowness against the radioactive decay processes. If you can go to the next slide. This just shows some of the science that has gone into making sure that these things are safe for the long term. You actually see a solar powered dry cask here. Now, wait a minute. Yeah, I said there were no moving parts. Why does it need power? It doesn't need power. This is a specially instrumented cask. We put instruments on there to confirm what we believe is going on inside. And they have indeed done that. In fact, they've shown that we have over designed it and it's working even better than expected. We did this with a previous cask where we opened it up and inspected the contents. We've got robots that go in between the steel shells and the concrete. You see one of them being operated here, and you see what happened in Southern California. Before the people of Southern California were going to accept tearing that plant down, they wanted to know the fuel that would be safe there without the plant there to support it. And so the California Coastal Commission gave a lot of scrutiny to, okay, how can we manage these things for the long term? What if we see a spot of corrosion on the side of one of these stainless steel canisters? And, you know, can we repair it? And we demonstrated it to the satisfaction of the California Coastal Commission, and they were a tough audience, as they should be. That we could indeed, our robots could go inside those shells and repair it. Now, again, that's why it's important to note how thick a 1/2 inch of stainless steel is, because, you know, it would take corrosion decades to eat through that. And, you know, at the sign of the first spot, because we do inspect samples of these, and we do have science that tells us where our most corrosive environments are, where we need to be looking. You know, we would, and that's why I put time as one of the layers of protection on that dry cask slide earlier, because, you know, we can stay ahead of corrosion here, just as the geologic processes can beat the radioactive decay processes. And you know, it's interesting, although we'd love to talk about how dangerous nuclear waste is, and spent fuel in particular, most forms of hazardous material we put into the environment don't have a half-life. They don't become harmless over time. Granted, it's long periods of time, millions of years. But it's an interestingly misunderstood material that is spent fuel. But if you look at the record of containing it, it proves the science that we have and these systems work. So if you go to the next slide, Dan, again, I alluded to what is your interest here. Why consolidate it? Because all those robots and all that infrastructure, having that in one place, having all the security in one place, consolidating an environment where the air is not corrosive at all. You know, we've been looking at locations in relatively arid spaces. Now, some of those spaces also happen to be of interest to the tribes and to other communities. So again, we have to do this at the intersection of good energy policy and good environmental justice policy. But really getting the materials all in one place allows them to be most effectively managed for a couple places until we can get agreement on where to do geologic disposal. You create environmental opportunity both in the community that now has land it can repurpose. There are some communities, by the way, that have torn down an old nuclear plant and are thinking maybe of building a new nuclear plant on that same site, one of these small reactors Christine talked about. You know, that's kind of the way modernization goes. You know, you don't keep driving the Model T. You move on to the DeLorean and beyond. So you know, that's a healthy energy segment there. And again, moving the fuel helps keep that going. Even if you wanted to put some other form of industrial or even recreational, or just take it back to nature, there's opportunities in doing this. And again, if you had interim storage, you could let the debate over geologic disposal take the time it needs to take. You'll hear about consent-based siting. Consent is not something that comes with the stroke of a pen. Consent is something you have to earn over time. And when you're talking about final solutions, when you're looking 7 generations ahead, you need to take your time in making sure you've got it right you've got all the stakeholders understanding what's going on here and on board. If you go to the next slide, how are we doing? Well, mixed right now. I know we've got a couple representatives from New Mexico. I don't know if we have anybody from Texas on here. Again, the trials and tribulations of Zoom. I might have gone around the room before we started and looked at your badges if we were in a room, or looked at your name tags. But anyway, the Texas project recently received a license from the NRC. Therefore they could begin constructing it immediately, except the state of Texas passed a law banning it. And the question exists, and here we get to the intersection of environmental justice a little bit. Can a state ban a federal licensed facility? And should a federal licensed facility attempt to be built in a state that banned it? Well, the governor of Texas is going to test that. He's already taken it to court. The licensee had no intention of going straight to court, whether they might have at some point. Their business model looks pretty far ahead. They're looking at this over the life of many nuclear plants. So they've got their license. Will they have an opportunity to change hearts and minds in Texas? I know they would like to. And I think, again, groups such as yours paying attention to this, understanding this, and communicating on this is of vital importance. New Mexico, that licensing process is running about 6 months or so behind. We're expecting a decision from NRC on the proposed Holtec facility in the first quarter of 2022, maybe second quarter, but I need to stand up for my member company and say, yeah, we're going to get it in the first quarter. We'll see how does the state of New Mexico react to that. How does Holtec work to build consent? We'll have to see how those two projects proceed. I think they have promise, but I think they have their work cut out for them. There is a third project that received its license back in 2006, private fuel storage. That license still exists. I don't know of any real major groundswell of, hey, let's get that back. That was one where, yes, the state of Utah opposed it. Again, if you focus on how radioactive this stuff is instead of how inherently containable it is, you tend to generate opposition pretty fast. And the process never really got to an end. The state had gotten the Department of Interior to put some barriers in place to moving the project forward. The Utah facility was designed with a different business case in mind. It was designed to prevent facilities from having to build out dry cast storage on their reactors. The Texas and New Mexico projects are built on a complete, and so when they went ahead and built out the dry storage facilities I showed you on that map, well, the interest in overcoming the opposition, or the interest in working with the opposition to build consent, it just evaporated. But the project license is still being maintained, so you never know. And the business case for both the Holtec and the Interim Storage Partners project is tied to the decommissioning business models. I talked about how good we've gotten at decommissioning in this country. We are the leader in the world, primarily because we know where to send the reactor parts, all those low-level waste disposal facilities I alluded to earlier. And the same companies that own the decommissioned sites own these two facilities. So it's part of their business model. They want to get their fuel out of those sites into this site so they can more efficiently manage it, and so that they can repurpose the sites they now own that used to have spent fuel on them. So the business case is actually quite compelling in both of these sites. Again, work to be done in building consent. I've got a few slides in transportation I'll gloss over really quickly here. These are material, if you go to the next slide, Dan. People like to say, well, because you don't have the final solution to use fuel, you don't know you can move it. And wow, moving it must be really scary and dangerous because it's highly radioactive and now it's out on the roads and the rails. Those are all red hair. It's a stack of red herrings is basically what that is. We have a tremendous amount of experience, which is summarized in this slide, and Dan on the next slide after that. You see that, again, we trade an overkill in this business. These are not your ordinary trains. They're not just rumbling down with routine cargo. These are specially designed. There's a lot of security in the caboose. There was actually some shipments going between nuclear plants many years ago. They were rolling by a prison about around the time a couple prisoners escaped. And what do escape prisoners do? They jump on trains, but they shouldn't jump on nuclear waste trains, because within seconds of climbing up on one of those spacer cars, they were staring down the end of some gun barrels of some very big guns. So these things are very well protected. And if you go to the next slide, Dan, just some factoids. This is just a collection. The next slide is just a collection of factoids of how much experience we've had transporting all over the world, all over the United States, naval fuel, commercial fuel. In France, they do that recycling step I talked about, and so they are routinely transport. You can't travel around France without encountering a spent fuel shipment at some point. So those are just some factoids for your use. Going to the next slide, I will not talk much about the Nuclear Waste Policy Act. It still is the law of the land. You can see its checkered history. You can see it was signed by Ronald Reagan. This whole process was working great. There is a lot of science on Yucca Mountain and an NRC decision that it meets all of its safety and environmental regulations. But during the Obama administration, we decided we were going to try to use a consent-based siting process. Go to the next slide, Dan. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act, it was a consent-based process up to a point until the 1987 amendments pointed at Nevada and cut off other alternatives and created a lot of stuff I won't talk about in terms of bad blood. But the Blue Ribbon Commission, chartered under the Obama administration, laid out a new path forward. That path obviously wasn't pursued, and I'm a registered independent here, but so it kind of, I can criticize either side almost equally as well. But when we live in a world where one side says black, the other side has to say white. So this process was put in abeyance during the Trump administration, but it is coming back. This is how the Biden administration will proceed. And if you can go to the next slide, Dan, you can see that it's kind of a journey where you don't know where you're going as you get started. I mean, if you've ever taken that kind of a vacation, I don't know, but you have to adjust and adapt as you go along, and that's why these ideas that consent is just some grand proclamation at the beginning of a project won't work. It takes work of a lot of people, and a lot of learned bodies have studied this. And if you go to the next slide, Dan, in the global context, there are several countries that are succeeding with an adaptive or phased process for siting spent fuel facilities. Finland is under construction. They've got their license. They'll be the first to actually set in motion that race between geology and radioactive decay. France is a real great example of what I mean by adaptive phase management. They, in consultation with local authorities, have decided to go first with a pilot phase. Learn from the pilot phase, reconsult with the local authorities, maybe change the design, maybe change the location of the entrance tunnels. The local authorities have input to all that. Canada, by partnering with what they call the First Nations, the indigenous communities, has been running a process where 22 volunteer sites have been narrowed down to 2. And in most cases, the ones that got knocked off the list, they felt disappointed. They felt like they did not win. And so they're doing the geology on those last 2. Switzerland is looking at a number of sites, and Sweden is actually, Finland copied Sweden's process. The anti-nuclear movement in Sweden has slowed things down in Sweden's environmental courts just a bit. So Sweden will be behind Finland, if not France and some of the other countries, but they have a sound process there. Again, all of these consent-based, and many of these countries have pursued the efficiency of interim storage ahead of disposal, knowing that in an adaptive phase process, it takes time, and you're better off consolidating then. Going to the next slide, decarbonization. Yeah, you guys know all this, especially those of you in Illinois that just saved some nuclear plants. You got oops, yeah, go back there just saying. You got a Democratic Secretary of Energy who gets it, why we need to decarbonize and why we need to do something with used fuel as we're doing that. You got the Republican governor of Wyoming standing up here saying that he wants to repurpose a coal plant with a nuclear plant. Now that's in a coal state, and all along corporate America has been on this bandwagon. You see the General Motors commitment to electric cars, and the surfer who survived a shark attack. And really, I always like to point that out to mention that really this is all about survival. It's about the survival of the planet. It's about our survival as a collective civilization. And all these issues come together. Some reading homework for you on the next slide. You know, just in this last month, the Government Accounting Office put together a real thorough report. It pretty much explains and urges the government to follow through on the Blue Ribbon Commission report. Senator Markey and Representative Levin have introduced a bill to form a task force to try to define consent. Now, that could be, you know, without saying a lot about Senator Markey and his record on nuclear, I hope we get a definition of consent that's workable out of whoever's committee. And then, you know, you have also this Congressional Spent Fuel Solutions Caucus, which hasn't done much. It's kind of looking for its place, and I know Levin's also on that. So you're already starting to see some things happen. I think you'll see a lot more. It's getting off to a slow start. But I think, again, the interest to decarbonize is strong. The interest in nuclear as part of that is strong. And there's going to be enough people asking the question that brought you all in this meeting about spent fuel. Go to the next slide, Dan. There is a way that you could actually build a nuclear plant that comes with its own disposal right under there. It's deep isolations. There's a reference to a report here you can look at where you build a reactor. Now, siting a reactor might be a challenge. Siting a repository might be a challenge. Doing both at the same time, that's got to be easy, right? But by going even deeper down, see the geologic repositories I've been talking about are only a few hundred meters below the surface. Here you're going a couple kilometers below. And ironically, the technology we've been using for fracking is what now enables that, because we've proven it with the fracking industry, and nobody's fracking nuclear waste. Don't ever confuse that. But that you can, you know, what the fracking people do is they run equipment down the ground, they blast things into the geology, and then they want their equipment back. Well, retrievability is a key component. And I've seen a demonstration of this at an oil rig in Texas. You can put a spent fuel assembly down one of these as it comes out of the reactor, and you can retrieve it if you need be for recycling, or if you get a repository and you want to do something different. So it's another option that's out there. I think it'll be deployed first in some small countries out there that don't have the wherewithal for the big repositories. I know Deep Isolation has a contract with Slovenia to look at this. And then the last two slides, I'll be very quick. You know, here's the recycling option. You know, this is remarkable because recycling or reprocessing has always been even more unpopular than some of the other things we do with used fuel. And particularly amongst the non-proliferation community, which is, we need to do this in a way that is in sync with the non-proliferation community. But here you have a Democratic administration spending money on reprocessing. We have the advanced reactor vendors. Some of them think they can get to their fuel more economically by starting with used fuel than fresh uranium. And doesn't that make a little sense to use the resources you've already taken out of the ground and not producing new spent fuel, but using the old spent fuel, still needing to dispose of all those radioactive byproducts. So there's an advanced reactor community very interested in this. And with respect to your time, Dan, let's go to the last slide. And the whole point of this thing is, you know, we've been trying to push for interim storage and disposal of spent fuel and maybe even reprocessing on its own merits. And that hasn't really worked out very well for us because the opponents are always good at telling everybody how radioactive it is and building upon the red herrings that are associated with transportation. However, now we got somebody pushing as well as pulling, because it's the interest in decarbonization. It's like, well, can we get this used fuel taken care of so we can build more carbon-free energy? So now we have not just trying to pull the fuel to a solution, but pushing it too. And I think that is going to be a game changer. I think it's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to snap your fingers and we're in a different world with this, but I am very confident that at some point in my career, before I pass this on to yet another generation, you know, Christine talked about how much experience I have. That means I'm spanning generations here. We still haven't disposed of the spent fuel, but I'm confident we'll get there before we get to another generation. So hopefully this information wasn't too much. Hopefully you'll be able to use it. And you know, Christine and I always stand ready to provide any support you might need on this issue. So hopefully I have some time for questions, Dan.
Yes, Thank you so much for that presentation. It's really informative, and I personally learned a lot, so I'm sure some other people did as well, and liked getting your perspective on a lot of this stuff. We did want to open the floor to a couple of representatives from New Mexico who offered to share some thoughts on the interim storage issue. So as Representative Chandler, I think I still see you here if you would like to offer remarks. And again, we're apologies for being long-winded today, but hopefully you can stick around and hear these comments.
Great, and I'm pleased to participate along with my colleague, Representative Brown. I think that Rod did a very good overview about kind of the status of the two facilities that are in our neck of the woods, the southern part of New Mexico, and right over the border in Andrews County, the other facility, and the kind of political legal posture of the Texas situation is now informing individuals in our state as well in terms of potential strategies. There's kind of a split. I'd say the local officials, and I know Representative Brown can speak in more depth about this, local community leaders and local officials very much support the project. However, in terms of statewide support of elected leaders and elected officials, that support, I think it's fair to say, is not widespread. There are pockets of support, but the governor, the attorney general, a number of senators and representatives have been on the record as actively and vigorously opposing the siting of the Holtec Eddy County Alliance facility in the southern part of the state. I think that's a fair characterization of what's going on. With Texas now jumping on, I'm expecting that we'll be learning more about their strategies and so on, and I would expect that there will be efforts to follow suit, and literally and figuratively. So that's kind of the status. The opposition falls within all kinds of categories that you all have probably seen before. There's concerns about health and safety. There's concerns about the radioactivity. There's concerns about transportation, both by rail and otherwise. I'm trying to think. Oh, and I think an overarching concern that I share is the fact that we're concerned that it's really not interim. We've made zero progress or very little progress since the Yucca Mountain site's been kind of put in abeyance in identifying permanent storage. And there are concerns that this approach lifts the pressure on to come up with something and uses New Mexico as kind of the fall guy, if you want to put it that way. So New Mexico and other sites that are asked to do this for the country. Lastly, I'd point out we have the WIP site, which it holds a different kind of hazardous material, but nonetheless radioactive and hazardous material. And the concern is we're now being viewed as a great place for these kinds of activities. So I'll turn the floor over to my colleague at this point.
Thank you, Representative Chandler. Yeah, it's an honor to serve with Representative Chandler. We are somewhat on different sides of the fence on the issue of consolidated interim storage. And so as she mentioned, we have an experience here in the southeastern part of New Mexico with the WIP site. And for those of you not familiar with that abbreviation, it stands for Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. That's a facility that was many years in the making, and the community, since it was nuclear and a lot of people are not familiar with nuclear science, a lot of time was spent explaining to anybody who wanted to listen what was involved in that effort. And the community basically said, if you can show us it's safe, then we'll welcome it. And so that's what happened with WIP. And so there's a bit of a comfort level here with nuclear because we've seen how that has been a safe operation. And just a footnote on that, one of the drums that came down from Los Alamos had some organic material in it, caused the lid on one of the drums to open, and there was a slight radiation release, but it was not even reportable based on the quantity of radioactivity, but nonetheless, it was reported. And I think you all know how that one all played out in the end. But WIP is back open. And so as was mentioned, the Eddie Lee Energy Alliance is an organization. I'm not personally involved with it, but leaders from the cities of Hobbs and Carlsbad and the counties of Lee and Eddy, and they're all right next door to each other, decided this was this Holtec. Holtec was the bidder that won the nod, but basically that consolidated interim storage was a good idea and could be accomplished safely. And so Holtec put in its application before the NRC. And so in first quarter of 2022, there will probably be a determination, but I'd like the committee members to know that, or the working group members to know that the NRC did deal with the environmental impact statements for both the proposed Holtec project in New Mexico and the interim storage partners facility in Andrews, Texas, which is just across the border, the state border, and said that there would be no minimal impacts. And those of us who know about the NRC know it's a very hard-nosed regulator, very detailed, very precise analysis. And, all the concerns that were raised about, the risk, the danger, all those things, the NRC regulators decided that those were not major issues and that there were good answers to them. And then I believe there was a period of time during which some people asked for some additional information, and that is part of the reason for the delay. Holtec went ahead and answered those questions. So we're waiting for the NRC to make a determination. But I think ultimately, I'm very interested in what Texas just did, passing this legislation to ban nuclear storage, spent fuel storage. I'd like to call it used fuel storage, actually. I don't know the ins and outs of the debate on that legislation, but I'd like to pose this question. If Texas can do it, and it looks like New Mexico, some legislators are going to attempt that either in the upcoming legislative session, starts in January, or the one the year after. What if all 50 states pass this type of legislation saying no spent fuel storage in our state? And that would be an interesting conundrum, I think, if everybody takes that same approach. The ultimate question is, does the NRC as a federal agency have a type of preemption over these proposed facilities? They are the licensing agency, but we know the state has a role to play in the issuing of certain permits. So I just think that's going to be something to watch. And ultimately, I think Congress needs to get its act together and pass some legislation to provide, as it promised it would, permanent storage for spent fuel. Yucca Mountain is a no-go. And so I think the ball is in Congress's court. Our representatives there need to do their work and provide a solution. So anyway, from my vantage point, it's a tale of what difference a new administration makes, because just a few years ago, when Susana Martinez was the governor of New Mexico, the House of Representatives passed a memorial that basically said we're open to Holtec and consolidated interim storage occurring in New Mexico. And now there's been a great effort to change the narrative and say that most people are opposed. But here's the last thing I'll say: if everyone who was polled about their opinion about these storage facilities were to sit and listen to Mr. McCollum explain the science and the technology behind these facilities, I think the people would say we're okay with it because we understand it now, not just in terms of a general thing about nuclear is bad, but people would actually get into the details of the projects and understand the engineering and the science. And that's where I think perhaps some mistakes were made with these interim storage facility proposals, is that time was not taken to educate well enough. And so with that, I think that covers what I wanted to say initially. Thank you.
Thank you for that,
Great.
Kath. I also want to emphasize something Christine said, and I want to thank you both for your diligent work on behalf of your constituents. It is about building an understanding here. Yes, the lack of a repository does loom large in interim storage. The what if it is permanent question is a huge question. Holtec even wrote a letter to the Secretary of Energy encouraging some progress there to support their project. I can say one of the things I forgot to say, because I didn't add it to my slides at the last minute because it didn't happen last Friday as I thought it might, but it will happen soon, is the Department of Energy is going to issue some sort of a request for information, an opportunity for communities and stakeholders and the various interests involved to weigh in on the consent-based siting and consolidated interim storage. I would encourage, New Mexico to ask those kinds of questions in that process, because it's not going to be a process where DOE says we're talking consent based here. It's not going to be a process where DOE says, well, here's what we're going to do. You like it? No, it's going to be a process where DOE asks you what they should do. Now, can a government agency really do that? And we'll see. But yeah, please, I would encourage you to continue your engagement and to look into that process, look at what many interests in your state, many constituencies might be saying in response to that process, and we'll see what other states say, because yeah, if all 50 say no, I guess that just leaves the District of Columbia, which would be ironic. The same Congress that's done nothing for all these years would be stuck with it.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you to Representative Chandler and Representative Brown for sharing those perspectives. We do have Senator Steinborn from New Mexico who requested to speak on this. So hopefully we can all give him some time.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, everybody. My name is Jeff Steinborn, and I'm state senator in New Mexico and happen to be the chair of the bicameral legislative radioactive and hazardous materials committee for the New Mexico legislature, which is a joint House Senate committee. And second time being the chair, we've had numerous hearings on this, and want to just kind of add to what folks have said and also give a little bit more background on the state of New Mexico. Number one, it sounds like we're all in agreement that the federal government really needs to get to work post haste on figuring out a permanent repository, and that's super important, and we all agree on that. But I also think that the huge deficiency going on right now with the federal government is the lack of a consent-based approach. And while that may be academic, if you don't live in a state that's got a bullseye on you, when you're a state that has triggered this process to be a destination for the country's spent fuel, it takes a human dimension to why consent-based is important. And it's really interesting that we're having this conversation on Indigenous Day here in the state of New Mexico. We renamed Columbus Indigenous Day, and we've talked a lot about the intersectionality of social justice and concern for Native rights. Well, New Mexico has borne a very high cost of uranium mining and nuclear endeavors. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, my committee had a hearing outside Gallup, which was really kind of ground zero for a lot of the uranium mining to meet the country's national security needs. And we looked at abandoned uranium mining sites where you have really widespread, cases of cancer and high costs of that legacy. And in the state of New Mexico, we have about 500 abandoned uranium mining sites with no title to it at all. And right now with this new project to store the nation's high-level nuclear waste here, I want everyone to know on Indigenous Day, the All Pueblo Council of Governors of the state of New Mexico has come out opposed to this project. And they feel once again, we have the target on us to be the country's repository for this waste. So it's, we do need a consent-based project. And not only that, communities representing about 40% of the state's population have passed resolutions opposing having this waste come through their community, including the community I represent, but a lot of big cities like Albuquerque and Santa Fe and towns like that, Las Cruces. So it's, the country is really in a pickle. We do need to figure it out. And now it was mentioned Texas is testing this in courts, but the New Mexico Attorney General actually has already filed suit against the federal government, saying that the siting of this waste without state consent is essentially a violation of states' rights. So it does definitely raise some interesting legal questions over that we've all pondered today, which are what are states' rights, or can a state be run roughshod over and be told you're it? But it's a tough one because nobody wants to be it really, and but people want to generate the waste. So I know we'll keep having the conversation, and we're going to. And by the way, the EIS that's being done by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission right now is not looking at a comprehensive set of issues. They're not looking at transportation, for example. They're not looking at social justice issues. They're looking at a finite set of technical issues on site, and it hasn't been determined yet for New Mexico. So to be continued there. But thank you all so much for hosting this conversation today, and look forward to the continued conversation.
Yes, this is, thank you, Senator Steinborn. This has been a very sort of interesting and lively conversation, and we've definitely exceeded our time today. So I do want to, I know we're all busy and want to kind of close the meeting, but hopefully you can reach out to Dan or I, and we can connect you with people at NEI. If you do have follow-up questions, or, because this was such, sort of a lively conversation, maybe it's a topic for future NLWG meetings or sessions and those types of things. So again, thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your day, especially if it is Indigenous Peoples Day in your jurisdiction, or Columbus Day and you have it off. And thank you to Rod and Christine at NEI for being here to speak with us today. Yep. Thank you.
And
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Bye, folks.
Thanks,
See ya.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Sally.
everybody. Thanks. Yep.
All right,
Thank you.
bye-bye.